Alright, welcome back. So in this video, we're now going to talk about the connection between negative entities and your dreams. Right, so when I was actually reading the section in the book, just to kind of remind myself of what I discussed at this particular section of the book, I realized that I actually discussed a lot of the ideas already. So, but I'll just go through the motions anyway. We'll kind of talk about the basics of that connection. But like I said, a lot of it I already discussed. So, we basically talked about how, before I get into this, we talked about how negative entities, right, so demons, they can plant suggestions in your subconscious mind, right? That suggestion will cause your subconscious to compel you in a very particular way, and it'll reflect the nature of that negative entity, right? The more transcendentally connected to the entity that you are, the more possessed you're becoming, right? The more the deeper the infection is occurring, or the more powerful the infection is becoming, right? And your nature basically starts to reflect the nature of the negative entity, which means you're going to be losing more and more spiritual energy, right? And we talked about how usually the avenue in which they will do that is through emotional possession. So they'll plant suggestions that generally will cause you to engage in behaviors that more or less will charge a particular negative frequency. Could be hate, could be pride, vanity, lust, rage, revenge, anger, any one of those, right? And you'll engage in behaviors that will sort of charge those frequencies, but there'll be some sinful behavior, and there'll be obviously something very, very negative, right? And they groom you and try to get you to engage in worse and worse behaviors by society standards. With psychic possession, they'll plant a suggestion in your subconscious in such a way that affects your psychic abilities, which I know I keep saying it, but just to be clear, we haven't really talked about those in too much detail yet, but those abilities are normally toned down to almost non-existent levels. But they have the ability to sort of awaken them more. Usually it's when you've already awakened them to some degree, but they have the ability to influence your subconscious to use your psychic abilities in a certain way. They can cause you to sort of see spirits in the spirit realm as you're going about your day. A lot of times people will see orbs or something like that. They can communicate with you in a much more clear way. So that way that goes beyond like a suggestion through your subconscious, which would feel like an intuition. They can actually speak to you because now your psychic abilities are turned on. You can hear them. And they can cause you to use psychic abilities in other ways, basically extrasensory perception or controlling your chi energy in certain ways. As well as causing you to astral project, which is a little bit related to what we'll get into. But they can basically do things like that, as well as forcing you to see things and hear things that you don't want to because your psychic abilities are turned on. So I just basically want to go over that recap to say that majority of that occurs during your waking day, right? So they plant those suggestions while you're awake, and that's ultimately how they manifest. Excuse me. However, what they can also do, which is very important, is they can plant these suggestions also while you're sleeping, right? So it makes no difference, right, that you're asleep, right? They can still plant those suggestions all the same, right? If you're transcendentally connected to them, right? There's not like you're really going anywhere when you're sleeping. Your subconscious is still right there. They can still plant a suggestion in the same exact way. The difference now is that that suggestion is going to manifest in your dream, right? And so now you're kind of in a whole new area with your possession and the infection. So to go over this point, negative entities can plant suggestions in your subconscious while dreaming. This allows them to manifest in your dreams, often causing nightmares, right? So that's very important. In psychology, so I actually looked it up, because I feel like I know where nightmares come from. I've rarely ever had any nightmares growing up. I always wondered why people would even talk about nightmares. I think I had like 2 or 3 nightmares up until I was like in my 20s, right? Like I'm pretty sure I remember them. I'd have to think about it, but for a long time I can remember them because they were so rare for me. And I'd always hear people talk about nightmares like they're normal. I'm like, I don't think they're normal, right? Because I'd never really experienced them. But ultimately, I believe that nightmares, part of where they come from, are negative entities. Not always, right? It doesn't have to be. And to kind of understand more about that, We'd have to wait until chapter 10. In chapter 10, we're going to talk more about where your dreams come from in general. But for the moment, we're just going to say that nightmares can come from you just producing negative thoughts, but they can also come from negative entities, right? Usually they'll get a lot worse when it's a negative entity sort of invading them. And what I was going to say before that is that in psychology, I believe in psychology they say that nightmares are basically, and I think I put it in the book, I said it's a psychophysiologically induced condition often brought on by certain stresses from the environment, or it could be just stresses in your mind, but usually stresses in your mind come from stresses in the environment. Certain conditions in the environment that bring on anxiety and things like that, and just ultimately stress that make you stress out, which is partially actually true, believe it or not. It's like usually they just make up things in psychology. At least that's my opinion, right? So I'm not a doctor, not a psychologist, right? If you have issues, you go to a psychologist. All I'm saying is, in my opinion, they usually just make up things when the materialist view of the mind fails, which it fails all the time. They can't even explain where emotions come from. But for nightmares, that's actually partially true, because when you're stressed out from the environment and there's all these stressors, you produce negative intentions, you will charge at a negative frequency, and that negative frequency will carry into your dreams because your subconscious hasn't discharged yet. So that's especially true if you deep charge negative frequencies. So that ultimately is just you imagining sort of negative things in your dreams, right? However, if you continuously do that, and especially if you engage in sinful behaviors, right, because your spiritual energy will drop. So sinful thoughts or sinful behaviors, your spiritual energy is going to drop. And the moment your spiritual energy drops, right, now, I'm not going to say it's like a floodgates, but negative entities can now come in, right? So they can start to come in your dreams, and they can plant suggestions in your dreams, but it's a little more than that, right? It's more like they can now enter your dreams, manifest within them. So there's some metaphysical sort of principles going on there, which I think it'll make a little more sense based on what we talk about in chapter 10, which you don't really cover that precisely in chapter 10, but it seems like it's almost like you're in another reality. Your dreams are almost like another reality or dimension, and although they plant suggestions there the same way they do when you're awake, it feels more like they're just entering your dreams, right? And they can do that more easily as they transcendentally connect to you more. And so at that point, they can cause nightmares, right? So, and the type of nightmare that they cause will be dependent on the demon, the type of demon. So if it's emotional demon, so if you're emotionally possessed, right, I believe it's also possible to have an anxiety or fear demon, right? So those would be demons who, let's say there's someone who's constantly feeling fear and are panicking about something, right? You can actually have a demonic entity latch onto you, right, and start causing you more and more fear and more panic, right? So you feel more anxiety, right? And by the way, that can actually manifest in your dreams. That can manifest in your body if it's a prolonged charge. You'll have more anxiety, right? So they can actually make it worse. Difficult to say if that's a sinful behavior, so that I'm not sure about. I feel like that might be an exception. I feel like if a person is in a lot of fear, I don't know if I would call it sinful, because I don't feel like I don't know if I've been in that state, like, in a way some people are, but I have been in that state, especially when I had a lot of anxiety, but that was really brought on by my body. So it's difficult for me to say. But I do remember when I charged a whole bunch of fear and anxiety when I was first testing this stuff out. I talked about that in chapter 4 of book 1. But I wasn't paying attention to spiritual energy at the time. I don't remember having any nightmares, though. So it's tough to say. I don't know that that's sinful behavior. So that might even be a slight contradiction in this whole theory, right? But I would have to think about it a little more. But suffice it to say, I do believe that there is a such thing as a fear demon, and they can come in your dreams when you're feeling a lot of panic and anxiety, right? But I could be wrong about that, because I don't really read about that too much anyway. More so, it's when you actually are sinning, right? So when you're doing something wrong, it could be taking a lot of drugs, drinking a lot of alcohol, right? Hurting people, or just being a racist or angry person, right? So maybe there is no contradiction there, because I haven't really seen that too much. But when you do live in sin, right, and you're having sinful thoughts, yes, negative entities can enter your dreams, and they can cause all types of problems, right? They can basically give you nightmares and make you see the worst types of things, be in the worst situations where people are torturing you or you're killing someone or something like that, right? A lot of times that will be them. And if you have a lust demon, also, they can cause you to have sex in your dreams, right? Now, yes, some people don't, to some people that's very pleasurable, but no, that's generally, as far as I can tell, that's almost always a demonic entity. Because when you have sex with them in your dreams and you consent to that, you're bonding with that demon more. It's way easier for them to possess you when you do that and cause lustful addictions and things like that, which ultimately keeps you away from God and also causes you to become more depressed. And you have a greater addiction to watching adult titles, pleasuring yourself, things like that. So that's so if you are having encounters in your dreams like that with lust, they won't appear to you as like usually a demonic entity. They would appear to you as like a beautiful woman or something. But if you consent to having sex in that way, yes, that's going to cause you to become possessed. Like, don't do that, right? So even though it's tempting, avoid that. Push that back and pray to God. We'll talk more about how to get rid of this infection in the next video where we talk about God and Jesus Christ. But for now, yes, don't do that. But normally, in the other cases, when they appear to you in your dreams, it's usually just pretty bad and they're causing you a nightmare. In the second case, when it comes to psychic possession, so yeah, they can definitely appear to you in your dreams in that case. Usually in that case, they're just communicating with you or talking to you under some false pretense which you've consented to. So that could be any form of channeling. If you channel entities, you'll see them in your dreams. And things like that, they'll talk to you. They can force you to astral project. That's a psychic ability or extension of your psychic abilities. So they could force you to astral project and start causing experiences that way. And things like that. And those can also ultimately be nightmares as well. So to go over this next point, although negative entities often can harass you in your dreams, they often don't to give you a false sense of security. So this was something that I learned, is all my life I never really had, I would say nightmares. I've definitely had sex dreams, not that often though, right? And I used to watch a lot of adult titles. But it was only really when I stopped like sinning and trying to come out of sin, especially when I try to go into a state of repentance and I'm like, okay, I'm turning to Jesus, because I did that a few times in my life, and then I would fall back. But whenever I did, boom, I would start having sex dreams left and right. You know what I mean? And when I did psychic abilities, I did have some demonic dreams, but not that many. And then when I stopped using psychic abilities, I'm like, okay, I'm ending this, I'm going to Jesus. Boom, like I'm getting swarmed with negative, demonic entities entering my dreams. So I started having nightmares with negative entities left and right the second I stopped using psychic abilities. And so that's when I realized this, right? They have the ability to enter your dreams like crazy when you're living in sin. Often that doesn't happen because they want you to have a false sense of security. They want you to feel like you're not doing anything wrong, right? If you were to sin, when you live in sin, if you were to just start having nightmares and you notice you don't have them when you're not in sin, when you come to Jesus Christ, then you would be like, oh, well, I'm just going to go to Jesus, right? So a lot of times they won't attack you, right? And I learned that they have the ability to attack you. They just don't, right? Sometimes they will, and I think, as I keep saying, God does that to compel them to reveal themselves so that you know what's going on. Actually, I'll get into that a little bit here. To go over this next point, negative entities will generally cause nightmares to keep you in fear when compelled to reveal themselves by God, or to taunt or tempt you when you're repenting. So like I said, I kind of went over that a little bit. But so basically what I'm going over here is why they cause you nightmares. Like, what's the point in doing that? Well, one of the cases is to keep you in fear, right? So if you're very, If you're charged up at some negative frequency and you're emotionally possessed, right, or even if you're psychically possessed, because they can force you to see whatever they want to, because they're basically controlling your senses, your spirit senses, which is how psychic abilities work, which we'll talk about later. But they can sort of keep you seeing extremely demonic negative images and sounds. You can hear people screaming. They can torture you in your dreams. They can actually cause you physical pain. Well, not physical pain, but it'll feel like pain in your dream. They can do all of that. And if it makes you keep feeling fear, that makes it harder for you to connect to God. So they'll do that. That basically can kind of be debilitating and almost destroy your life, that works for them, right? So they don't mind that, so they'll do it then. But they can also cause you nightmares, even though they don't often want to, because they like when you live in sin and you feel like you're comfortable, you feel like there's no problems. They may just start causing you nightmares if they're compelled to by God. So this is something I believe happens. God will compel them to reveal their true nature, right? So they'll just start giving you nightmares, right? And nightmares that are evil. And if you continue to live in sin anyway, at some point you're going to make the connection, right? God knows when you've done this. You'll make the connection that your sins are causing these nightmares. And if you just say, well, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing anyway, right? Then you're acting against the truth, which you know. That is a rejection of God, who is all truth, right? So that isn't good, right? But they'll do that if, I believe they'll cause you nightmares in that case, when compelled to by God. Another case where they'll give you nightmares is to taunt you or tempt you when you're repenting. So like I said, when you go into repentance, generally that's when they come out the woodworks and just start giving you all the nightmares they possibly can. Depending on your sin, in some cases, that'll just be nightmares. They'll mock you or taunt you. I've had that like crazy. I still get them a little bit. They'll basically just taunt you because they hate that you're turning to God and you're turning to Jesus Christ. So they'll just harass you and make it annoying for you to do that. Or they might tempt you. So if your sin is something based on temptation, right, like lust, or if you're someone who is into psychic abilities, and maybe you're tempted by going back into using those psychic abilities or using magic or something like that, they may give you a dream that tempts you, that reminds you of what you used to do. So they do that to me as well. And what they're basically looking to do is in the dream, they want to charge the subconscious memory associated with that sin. So let's say it's lust. When you engage in some lustful action in your dreams, you'll charge it a little bit and now it's more volatile. So not only is it in your passive memory, not only is it in your short-term memory, so it's affecting your mood, it's also a little bit charged now. And things charge in your dream much faster. So when you wake up, you're going to be in the mood and you're going to want to give into that sin or that temptation. Right, so that's basically what they're doing, and that actually worked on me a couple of times, right, when I was first repenting and trying to get out of that stuff, right? So those are basically the reasons why they'll cause you nightmares. There'll be some, in my opinion, some variation of that. To go over this point, if they're unable to fully manifest in your dreams, which does happen when you're not deep into sin or when you're coming out of it, if they're unable to fully manifest in your dream, they can hijack a dream character and try to communicate with you that way. So this is something that happened to me a couple of times. To talk more about this, I would have to talk more about the full nature of dreams, which we'll talk about in chapter 10. I think a little bit chapter 9, but mainly chapter 10. But for the moment, they do have the ability to hijack a character and start doing things in your dreams. And this makes it harder for you to receive messages from more positive sources, which again we'll talk about. But also, if you are sort of engaging in lucid dreaming and you're maybe if you're trying to astral project and things like that, then yes, they can hijack a character in your dream and start giving you messages, and you'll think they're messages from some positive source or something like that. One thing I've noticed in dreams is that when I think they hijack a character, when they speak, like, I don't know what they're saying. That never happens to any of the characters in my dream, right? Because when they speak, it's like I don't really need to hear them. I just know what they're saying because it's my dream, right? But when they hijack a character, they'll still speak. And something's off. It doesn't feel right. It's like they're trying to communicate with me in a way that's completely different from all the other characters in my dream. Like, I actually have to hear them Otherwise, I don't know what they're going to say. I don't know what they're trying to tell me. And it's just like a weird experience that happens every so often where they speak and I'm like, what? And I just can't hear them, and eventually I'll wake up. So that's something I've noticed. A negative entity will try to, when they hijack a character, they'll try to speak and it's like you can't hear them, right? And you just won't know what they're saying. Now, I think, based on the experience I had, I think sometimes that may also happen with positive entities, which we'll talk about later. But that's very rare. Normally, positive entities, they can communicate with you easily. Well, we'll talk more about them later because there are certain conditions that they also require for them to be able to communicate with you, which really has to do with spiritual energy and your relationship to God. But I just wanted to mention that here, in case maybe, you guys might have seen that, had a dream like that. The last thing I want to mention here, which isn't super important, but it has to do with some experiences I had, which was roughly two, with gray aliens, right? So gray aliens, I've had two experiences when I feel like they've entered my dreams and I've seen them, and they give off this feeling of depression, right? That feels like the absence of emotion, right? So it's a very it's a very apathetic feeling, right? Like they feel nothing, right? There's the absence of emotion, exactly like I said. Demons or negative entities, they usually will give off a lot of emotion, but it's a lot of negative emotion, right? A lot of hatred or anger, right? Or if it's a lust demon, they'll give off a lot of lust, like sexual lust. But gray aliens are different. They give off just the absence of emotion. I feel, it's like you might think, well, you don't feel anything from them. But no, that's not what it feels like, though. It's not like I don't feel anything, like I can't sense them. What I feel feels negative, but it feels like complete apathy. Like I just don't care. I have absolutely no sympathy for anyone. I couldn't care less about myself or anyone else, right? It's like a frequency like that. It's kind of strange. But I just want to mention that for anyone who might have experienced that, because that's what I felt from them. And I remember I had this dream where, I think I mentioned in the book, I was in this kind of war zone, right? With these, it was almost exactly like this movie, Live, Die, Repeat, I think. Edge of Tomorrow, something like that, with Tom Cruise. Yeah, I think it was Tom Cruise in the movie. And it was a war zone, just like in the beginning of that movie. And I was in the dream with this negative entity, right? And it's crazy, like, because they look so frail. But in the movie, in the dream, I tried to hit him with a bat, because this was just an attack, right? Which is funny, because now I think I know what the dream meant, because now I understand dream symbolism. I didn't know it back then. But, like, I ran up to him and tried to hit him with a bat, and, like, it didn't do anything at all, right? Like, it was like, if I hit this with my full force, this would still move a little bit, right? It would vibrate, it would go back and come forward, it would vibrate a little bit. Like, when I know this is a dream, so the laws of physics don't really match up, but it's like, still, I hit him with all of my strength, and it didn't even vibrate. It just did that. It was like they look frail, but what I got from that is that they're so powerful. Like, their bodies are really, really hard. Like, they're like robots. Which was just interesting. That was very surprising to me, right? And the same thing actually happened in another dream with an actual demon, right? So in this is when I was coming out of using my psychic abilities, and I was getting spiritual, well, we'll talk about spiritual attacks later, but I was getting demonic entities were entering my dreams left and right? And one of the dreams, I tried to hit one, I think I punched them. Yeah, I think in that case I tried to punch him. And no, I think I grabbed some weapon. I just don't remember what it was. I don't think it was actually my hand. It might have been. This was many years ago. But I hit him and it didn't do anything. It's like kind of shocking how invulnerable they are to physical attacks. It does absolutely nothing to them. So you can try to hit them, but it makes absolutely no difference to them. Demonic entities. It's just completely meaningless to them, right? The key to sort of attacking them, if you want to call it that, is to focus on love, increase your frequency, and really focus on Jesus Christ, right? That's really what you need in your life. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I think we covered pretty much everything that they would do in a dream, and how they affect you. Yeah, that's pretty much it. In the next chapter, in the next video, I'm going to talk about basically how to eradicate this subconscious infection, right? So when they're very deep into your subconscious and transcendentally connected to you, you want to now cleanse your subconscious, right? Which is a form of healing, right? Just like you want to heal an infection or cure an infection, you want to cure your subconscious. And the key to doing that, as always, and has, I think I just said, and as you might expect, is Jesus Christ, right? So we'll cover that in the next video. But that's it for now, though. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you then.